Beyond the Gates spoilers teased that Leslie never truly stopped causing trouble with her rudeness. In every circle she moved through, there was always some echo of irritation left behind, an aftermath of cutting words or careless remarks. But this time, her sharp tongue did not simply cause annoyance, it landed her squarely in the middle of a family crisis that was already tearing itself apart. Leslie, as if incapable of restraint, found herself criticizing the disappearance of Chelsea with the same harsh, dismissive tone she had used on neighbors for years. When she visited the Dupree household, her eyes scanned the property with suspicion. Something in the air was different here, heavy, as though the walls themselves were sagging under grief. The family was gathered, tense, raw from the disappearance of Chelsea. Yet Leslie couldn't resist poking at the wound. She knew Chelsea was missing, everybody did, and rather than offering comfort, she began spinning her own version of events. In Leslie's mind, Chelsea's vanishing was not tragedy but evidence of weakness, indulgence, and failure. Her words cut deeper than she realized. Danny, already stretched thin with worry, felt anger rise like a wave inside her. The mother who had endured sleepless nights, frantic calls, and gutting uncertainty now had to face the cruelty of a neighbor who treated their agony as gossip fodder. Bill stood nearby, his fists clenched, struggling to hold his composure as Leslie's remarks became sharper, uglier. The breaking point came quickly. Danny's hand shot across Leslie's face in a crack that echoed through the hall, a sound as shocking as it was inevitable. For a moment, time seemed to freeze. Leslie staggered, eyes wide with indignation. But before she could recover, the Dupree home had no space for her venom. Guards and relatives ushered her to the door, her protests trailing behind her like smoke. But even as she was expelled, Leslie's spite lingered. She muttered accusations that Chelsea's abduction was not a random act but the consequence of a young woman never learning to defend herself, of a family who coddled instead of prepared. Those words lingered in the minds of some, festering like an infection. It was easy to hate Leslie, but harder to ignore the kernel of truth she cloaked in venom. Chelsea had indeed been protected, perhaps overprotected, by those who loved her. And now she was gone. The tension did not end with Leslie's exit. Hayley arrived soon after, her presence a spark in dry tinder. She insisted that she only wanted to be beside her husband during such a dark time. To anyone outside the family, it might have seemed reasonable. But to Danny and the Duprees, Hayley's intrusion was an insult, an open wound pressed raw. Bill tried to explain, gently at first, then more firmly, that her presence was only complicating matters. He told her that the Dupree family needed unity, not division, and that her place was elsewhere. But Hayley, stubborn in her need for validation, refused to leave. She lingered close to Bill, positioning herself as his ally. But in doing so she only drew further contempt. Danny's family looked at her with disdain, whispers circling the room about how shameless she was to insert herself when she had once been the fracture in their lives. The Dupree mansion, once a place of laughter and warmth, became suffocating with tension. Every room carried the weight of eyes watching, judging, whispering. Every conversation was tinged with unspoken accusations. The search for Chelsea demanded clarity, focus, and swift decisions, but Leslie's earlier intrusion and Hayley's refusal to step back splintered the atmosphere into chaos. The family tried to focus on calls, contacts, leads from law enforcement, but every time Hayley inserted herself into a discussion, the room fractured again. Danny's patience, already worn thin, cracked under the pressure. She confronted Hayley directly, her voice low and dangerous, reminding her that while Bill might be her husband now, and nothing would ever erase the bond of blood and shared pain. Hayley flinched under the intensity, but her pride wouldn't let her retreat. She countered with words of her own, saying she only wanted to help, that she was there out of love. But the sincerity in her tone was overshadowed by desperation, and no one in the room believed her. Bill, caught between the two women, felt his shame deepen. He knew that bringing Hayley into this space had been a mistake, that it only widened the chasm between himself and Danny. For every look of contempt the family directed at Hayley, he felt the weight of his own choices pressing harder against his conscience. The Dupree's uncles, aunts, Cousins focused their energy where it mattered most. Chelsea. They organized search teams, coordinated with police, tracked down leads that trickled in from the community. Every phone call carried the potential for breakthrough or heartbreak. And yet, at every step, the disruptions caused by outsiders slowed progress. Even the smallest delays felt monumental when every passing hour put Chelsea further out of reach. In private moments, Dani wrestled with despair. She remembered Chelsea's laughter, the way her daughter used to light up rooms, and she felt guilt consume her for not protecting her better. She remembered warning signs she had brushed aside. Late-night conversations with Chelsea where unease was hidden beneath smiles. She had always thought she could keep her safe, but now that illusion was shattered. Bill, too, spent long hours staring into silence, revisiting every decision that had led them here. He thought of the years spent distant, the missed opportunities to connect with Chelsea, the comfort he had chosen in Hayley instead of the uncomfortable work of staying present in his first family's life. Now he was paying the price. And so was Chelsea. Leslie, meanwhile, wandered back into the neighborhood with her own version of the story. She told anyone who would listen that the Duprees had struck her, humiliated her, that their desperation was turning them into monsters. She framed herself as a victim, admitting her own cruelty, painting Dani as unstable, violent. To some, her words sowed doubt. To others, they confirmed what they already suspected. Leslie thrived on stirring the pot, and truth was often her first casualty. Back in the Dupree home, Dani and Bill's relatives convened late into the night, planning the next moves. Every detail mattered. Who would drive to distant towns to follow a lead, who would stay back to monitor phones, who would manage the younger siblings too scared to sleep. Hayley's attempts to insert herself into these conversations were met with silence or curt replies. She was not family, and in their eyes, she had no place here. Bill felt torn. He could see Hayley shrinking under the cold stares, but he also saw the pain in Dani's eyes and the exhaustion in his children. The choice became clearer with each passing hour. His loyalty had to be with Chelsea, Dani, and the family he once left behind. Hayley's needs, her pride, her insistence they could no longer be his priority. The weight of the search pressed harder on everyone. Rumors spread. Speculation grew wild, and the media began circling like vultures. The Dupree family wanted privacy, but with every passing day, more strangers appeared at their gates, asking questions, prying into pain. Leslie's gossip only fueled the fire, giving the public fragments of the story twisted through her lens. And still, Chelsea remained missing. The story of her disappearance was not just about her captivity. Not just about Allison's twisted games, it was also about the fractures in the family left behind. Every action, every word, every old wound reopened under the pressure. The Duprees had to learn that survival was not only about finding Chelsea but about enduring the turmoil tearing them apart from within. The night stretched long, filled with unanswered questions, lingering resentment, and the gnawing fear of what morning might bring. The Dupree household remained tense long after Leslie had been cast out. Her exit might have brought a temporary silence, but the sting of her words lingered like smoke after a fire. Dani sat in the parlor, staring at the wall as if it could offer answers, her jaw tight with the memory of striking Leslie. It wasn't the slap itself that haunted her but the fact that she had been driven to it, provoked into letting her rage surface when every ounce of her strength was needed for Chelsea. Bill sat a few feet away, silent, caught in his own spiral of shame. He had wanted to defend Dani, to silence Leslie before the situation erupted, but he had hesitated again, and now Dani bore the weight of that confrontation alone. Hayley drifted through the rooms like an unwanted guest at her own home, lingering at Bill's side whenever possible. Her voice was softer now, less confrontational, as though she sensed the way the family's contempt was hardening against her. Still, she refused to leave. Her presence grated on everyone, especially Dani, who felt her patience eroding with every glance Hayley cast toward Bill. The Dupree relatives whispered among themselves, their words sharp and unforgiving, calling Hayley shameless for clinging to a man whose first loyalty should have been with Dani and Chelsea. Bill noticed every glance, every word, and the judgment burned. He wanted to believe Hayley was trying, but in his heart he knew her insistence on staying was not about love or loyalty, it was about possession. She didn't want to lose her place, didn't want to admit that in this crisis, Danny's bond with him was stronger than any marriage vows Hayley could claim. His shame deepened each time Danny's family looked at him with disdain, seeing Hayley as proof of his betrayal. Meanwhile, Leslie was not finished. Cast out from the Dupree mansion, she carried her indignation like a weapon. To anyone who would listen, she painted herself as a victim of Danny's violence, a woman unfairly attacked for speaking uncomfortable truths. She leaned into her talent for stirring chaos, claiming that Chelsea's disappearance was proof that the Dupree family had raised her soft, spoiled, incapable of defending herself. Leslie's words spread through the neighborhood like wildfire, adding fuel to an already volatile situation. Some dismissed her as the gossip she had always been, but others began to wonder if she was right. Inside the mansion, Danny tried to shield herself from those whispers, but she could not help overhearing fragments of doubt even within her own relatives. The implication that Chelsea's fate was somehow her fault cut deeper than anything Leslie could say directly. Bill saw it too. The way Danny's shoulders hunched under invisible weight, the way her voice grew brittle when she gave orders to the search teams to tell her she had done everything she could, but his words would mean little now. He had spent too many years absent, too many moments letting her carry the burden alone. Hayley's presence made matters worse. During strategy meetings, she inserted herself, offering suggestions that were quickly dismissed, then sulking when her voice was ignored. She told Bill in private that Danny was manipulating the family against her, that if he truly wanted to help Chelsea he should leave with her and form a plan away from the Duprees. Bill listened but said nothing. Deep down, he knew leaving would sever what little trust remained with his daughter and Danny, and no plan of his could succeed without them. But Hayley's persistence gnawed at him, a constant tug-of-war between obligation and regret. Danny noticed the way Hayley clung to Bill, and though she didn't voice it, she saw the guilt in his eyes. She recognized that guilt because she had carried it herself for years. Guilt for not protecting Chelsea, guilt for letting her slip through cracks she should have seen. Danny had no patience for Hayley's insecurities. To her, this was not a time for ego or rivalry. It was about survival. She made it clear, both in words and in silences heavy as stone, that Hayley was an intruder, not an ally. As the hours turned into days, the family's desperation deepened. Search teams returned empty-handed, leads went cold. Danny clung to the belief that Chelsea was still alive, refusing to give in to despair, but even her strength wavered in the small hours of the night. Bill saw it, the tremors in her hands, the way she stared at Chelsea's childhood photos as though they might vanish too. In those moments, something shifted inside him. For the first time in years, Bill felt the pull of his old family stronger than anything else. Hayley's presence became background noise. Danny's resilience became his anchor. He realized that the shame he felt was not just about Chelsea's disappearance but about all the years he had wasted trying to build a life where his true heart didn't belong. Leslie, on the other hand, thrived on the chaos. She returned to the Dupree gates more than once, shouting accusations, demanding to be heard. Each time she was turned away, her bitterness grew. She began speaking to reporters, feeding them twisted versions of events inside the mansion. She claimed Danny was violent, that Bill was conflicted, that Hayley was the only sane one in the mess. The media, hungry for scandal, devoured every word. Soon the Dupree family found themselves not only fighting to save Chelsea but also to protect their reputation from the wildfire of lies Leslie had ignited. Hayley seized on the chaos. She told Bill that Leslie's words proved Danny was unstable, that the world was already turning against her, and that he should side with his wife instead of his past. But Bill finally reached his breaking point. He told Hayley, in a voice firm enough to silence her protests, that Chelsea was his daughter, Danny was her mother, and nothing, not gossip, not scandal, not even his marriage would change where his loyalty had to lie. The words stunned Hayley, and for the first time, she had no reply. The family, battered but unbroken, began to close ranks. Danny took the lead, guiding the search with renewed focus. Bill followed, no longer hesitant, ready to shoulder his share of the burden. The relatives who had wavered under Leslie's poison rallied again, unified by Danny's strength. Even in the darkest hours, they refused to give up hope. Yet Leslie's shadow loomed. Her words continued to spread, her bitterness poisoning public opinion. She had no true stake in Chelsea's fate, but she reveled in the drama, in the way her lies gave her power. In a twisted way, she had become as dangerous as the abductor themselves, not with knives or chains, but with whispers and accusations that tore at the family from the outside. As dawn broke after another sleepless night, Danny stood at the window, watching the first light spill across the lawn. Bill came to stand beside her, silent for a long time. Finally, he spoke, his voice low, raw with sincerity. He told her he knew he could never erase the past, never undo the choices that had brought them here. But he promised her on himself that from this moment on, he would not falter again. Danny didn't respond immediately. She kept her gaze fixed on the horizon, where the world was waking up. After a long silence, she simply nodded. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet, but it was a beginning. Inside the house, Chelsea's siblings stirred, asking again when their sister would come home. Danny swallowed her grief and told them what she always told them, soon. Bill listened, realizing that hope was the only currency they had left, and he vowed to guard it fiercely. Outside, Leslie plotted her next move, unaware that her words had lost their sting inside the mansion. And Hayley, standing alone in a guest room, realized that no matter how tightly she clung, she was already being pushed to the margins. The Dupree family's struggle was far from over. Chelsea was still missing, the search was still uncertain, and the scars between them had not healed. But amid the chaos, one truth emerged: the only way forward was together, no matter how fractured they had once been. And as Danny and Bill stood side by side, watching the sunrise, they both knew that the fight for Chelsea was not only about bringing her home but about reclaiming the strength of a family that had nearly been destroyed from within. The search for Chelsea reached a breaking point as tension inside the Dupree mansion boiled over. Days of sleepless nights, bitter confrontations, and whispered doubts had stripped everyone down to their rawest selves. The house itself felt haunted not by ghosts, but by guilt, secrets, and the gnawing fear that Chelsea's time was running out. Danny fought to keep her composure, though her exhaustion was visible in the way her hands trembled when she poured coffee or the way her eyes stayed fixed on the front door, as if sheer willpower might force Chelsea to walk through it. Bill stayed close to her now, no longer hiding in the shadow of Hayley's presence or retreating into silence. He had become a constant beside Danny, taking calls, organizing volunteers, even driving out with search teams at odd hours of the night. The more he threw himself into the effort, the clearer it became to him that this being at Danny's side, fighting for their daughter, was the place he should have been all along. For the first time in years, Danny didn't feel entirely alone in her battle. Hayley, meanwhile, had been pushed to the margins. Though she remained in the house, her voice had lost its power. Every attempt to interject was met with cold indifference, her suggestions ignored, her very presence treated like an intrusion. She spent long hours in silence, replaying Bill's words in her mind, the moment he had chosen Danny and Chelsea over her. Shame burned where jealousy once thrived, and yet she couldn't bring herself to leave. Something stubborn, perhaps even desperate, kept her rooted in a home that was no longer hers. Leslie's storm of lies and accusations raged outside, drawing reporters, neighbors, and strangers into a spectacle that turned Chelsea's disappearance into tabloid fodder. Cameras flashed at the gates, microphones stretched for sound bites, and every cruel word Leslie fed the media tightened the news of public opinion around the Dupree family. But inside the mansion, Danny and Bill had grown immune to it. Their focus was singular: bringing Chelsea back. The breakthrough came in the smallest of ways. Late one evening, as Danny sat with a map spread across the dining room table, Bill noticed a detail that had been overlooked: a cluster of abandoned storage units on the outskirts of town, barely mentioned in police reports. Something about the location's isolation, the forgotten nature of it, triggered Danny's intuition. She insisted they search it themselves, unwilling to wait another day. When they arrived, the place was silent, the air heavy with dust and disuse. Most of the units were padlocked, but one hung slightly ajar, its chain rusted and broken. Danny's heart pounded as she pushed the door open. Inside, the dim light revealed signs of recent activity: a mattress on the floor, food wrappers, rope tossed carelessly in the corner. And then, in the farthest corner, Chelsea. Her face was pale, her body weak, but her spirit was unbroken. She looked up at Danny and Bill with wide, wary eyes, as if she couldn't believe they were real. Danny rushed forward, tears spilling freely as she wrapped her daughter in trembling arms. Bill followed, his own voice choked as he whispered apologies that barely scratched the surface of what he owed her. Chelsea clung to them both, too exhausted to speak, but her grip was fierce, as if she feared they might vanish. The reunion was not without scars. Chelsea's ordeal had left visible marks, and the weight of her trauma hung heavy in the room. Danny knew the road ahead would not be simple. Healing never was. But in that moment, all that mattered was that Chelsea was alive. Back at the mansion, chaos erupted when news of Chelsea's rescue reached the reporters at the gate. Leslie, cornered by the truth, tried to spin the story, claiming she had always believed Chelsea would be found. But her lies no longer carried weight. The Dupree family closed ranks around Chelsea, shielding her from the frenzy and making it clear that Leslie's presence would no longer be tolerated. For the first time, Leslie found herself isolated, her power drained, her audience gone. Hayley stood on the staircase as Danny and Bill carried Chelsea inside. She saw the way Bill looked at his daughter, the way Danny's strength seemed renewed, and in that moment she understood what she had refused to see: there was no place for her here. She was an outsider in a story that had always belonged to Danny, Bill, and Chelsea. Without a word, she packed her things. By the time the house settled into a fragile peace, Hayley was gone. In the days that followed, the Dupree family worked quietly to rebuild. Chelsea spoke little of what she had endured, but she no longer had to face it alone. Danny stayed close, offering the steady presence of a mother who refused to falter. Bill, humbled and transformed, devoted himself to earning back the trust he had squandered. Every gesture, every late-night conversation, was a step toward mending what had been broken. The mansion, once heavy with tension, began to feel like a home again. The whispers of blame and judgment faded, replaced by a determination to protect Chelsea and one another. Even the reporters drifted away, their interest waning without Leslie's lies to feed them. For Danny, the journey was not about erasing the pain but about reclaiming the strength that pain had forged. She had endured betrayal, doubt, and the near loss of her daughter, but she had emerged unbroken. For Bill, it was a reckoning, a chance to finally stand where he belonged. For Chelsea, it was the beginning of healing, supported by a family that had nearly torn itself apart but found its way back together. And for Leslie, left to stew in her bitterness without an audience, it was a reminder that chaos without purpose eventually consumes itself. As the Dupree family gathered one evening, Chelsea nestled between her parents on the couch. Danny looked around the room and felt, for the first time in what felt like forever, a fragile but real sense of peace. They were not perfect, not healed, not free from scars, but they were together. And that, in the end, was everything.